Hello, and welcome to the M.O.W. channel. Today, we will be discussing the horrifying case known as the Killer Landlady or Death House. Landlady, a series of murders that took place between 1982 and 1988 in Sacramento, California, where multiple tenants were killed inside a boarding house. Why did she deliberately bring elderly individuals and people with mental disabilities into the very house she operated? Before we begin, please don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. It truly helps support the channel. Now, let's begin today's case file. On January 9, 1929, on the barren land of Redlands, California, a child named Dorothea Helen Gray was born into the world. Though she would later become one of the most terrifying serial killers in American history, her beginnings were anything but blessed. Tragedy followed her from the very start. Her parents, Trudy Mae Yates and Jesse James Gray, were impoverished cotton pickers, barely surviving day to day. Dorothea's memories of childhood were not filled with warmth or safety, but with relentless hunger, parental alcoholism, and violence. These early deprivations planted deep within her not a capacity for love, but an abnormal obsession with survival and the seeds of compulsive lying as a means of escaping reality. The true collapse came when she was just 8 years old. In 1937, her father died of tuberculosis. The family immediately fell apart. Before she could even process that loss, her mother died suddenly the following year in a motorcycle accident. For Dorothea, these consecutive deaths carved an unshakable belief into her mind that the world was a dangerous place that could abandon her at any moment. She was briefly placed in an orphanage, before being sent to live with relatives in Fresno. But by then, her wounded psyche could no longer grow into that of a normal child. To conceal her shameful origins, she began constructing an elaborate fictional identity. She told classmates she came from a prestigious Mexican family, or that she was the youngest of 3 sisters raised in comfort, carefully laundering her past through lies. At 16, in 1945, Dorothea married Fred McFall, a soldier recently returned from World War II. This was less an act of love than a desperate escape from a life she despised. Unsurprisingly, the marriage became another disaster. Between 1946 and 1948, she gave birth to 2 daughters, yet viewed them not as children to protect, but as burdens standing in the way of her ambitions. She abandoned her first daughter with relatives in Sacramento and gave her second child up for adoption immediately after birth, effectively severing any trace of maternal instinct. This marked the point where her inability to form responsibility or trust in human relationships became undeniable. When McFall eventually left, unable to tolerate her bizarre behavior and negligence, Dorothea faced crushing humiliation. Rather than admit abandonment, she spread the lie that her husband had died suddenly of a heart attack. She reframed her failure as an unavoidable tragedy, death, rather than rejection. Around this time, she committed her first act of check forgery, discovering both the thrill and financial gain of stealing from others. Sentenced to 1 year in prison and released after 6 months on parole, she showed no sign of reform. She soon had a third child with an unnamed man whom she also gave away immediately after birth. In 1952, she married Axel Johansson, a Swedish immigrant, appearing briefly stable, but her destructive tendencies never ceased. Though the marriage lasted over a decade, it was riddled with gambling, fraud, and constant conflict. By the 1960s, her crimes grew more calculated and brazen. She was arrested for owning and operating a brothel and served 90 days in jail. After her release, she continued to cycle through the courts on charges of vagrancy and theft. Through these experiences, she learned how to exploit weaknesses in the legal system and how to manipulate others while avoiding lasting consequences. Gradually, Dorothea began narrowing her targets to those society failed to protect: the elderly and the mentally disabled. While working as a nurse's aide, she observed just how easily they could be controlled, isolated, and forgotten. After divorcing Johansson in 1966, she married Roberto Puente, a Mexican immigrant, adopting the surname Puente, a name she would continue to use long after their marriage ended 2 years later. She deliberately cultivated the image of a kind, elderly Mexican grandmother, using it as a shield to mask her true intentions. She purchased a large house in downtown Sacramento, laying the groundwork for her boarding house operation. Following a brief and violent fourth marriage to Pedro Montalvo, Dorothea abandoned marriage altogether. Instead, she began frequenting cheap bars, intentionally targeting elderly men who relied on government assistance. Using her charm and forgery skills, she stole their pension and benefit checks. Though she was charged with dozens of counts of tax fraud, she never stopped. Even while on probation, she meticulously planned greater crimes, transforming her boarding house into a fortress of exploitation. By the early 1980s, once she settled into her residence at 1426 F Street, Sacramento, Her distorted life fully crossed the line from con artist to predatory killer. Dorothea Puente's early life is not merely a record of misfortune. It is a blueprint of how one individual dismantled social norms and constructed a twisted survival strategy of her own. Crushing poverty, abandonment, and habitual deception reshaped her into a psychopath incapable of empathy. All that remained was for her to wait inside the imaginary castle she built for powerless victims to arrive. The bodies later discovered buried in her backyard were not sudden acts of madness, but the inevitable outcome of a path set long before one, already written deep within her corrupted desires. In the early 1980s, a two-story Victorian house located at 1426 F Street in Sacramento appeared to be a final refuge for society's forgotten. To the outside world, it was a place of safety, at last shelter for those with nowhere else to go. The owner, Dorothea Puente, welcomed them with neatly pressed clothing, a warm smile, and the gentle voice of a kind grandmother. To social workers, she was known as a devoted boarding house manager who never turned away difficult cases. Elderly individuals suffering from mental illness or severe alcoholism, people rejected by other facilities found warm soup and a clean bed for the first time in her home. But this peaceful image was nothing more than the entrance to a meticulously designed trap. Dorothea Puente was not a philanthropist. She was a ruthless predator, hunting the very lifeline of her tenants, their social security checks. Her boarding house operated on two core principles: isolation and dependence. From the moment a tenant arrived, Dorothea began exerting complete control over every aspect of their daily lives. The first thing she seized was the mail. Tenants were strictly forbidden from accessing the mailbox. All mail was collected and sorted by Dorothea herself. Government-issued social security checks and pension notices disappeared into her drawers long before the tenants ever saw them. Using sophisticated forgery skills, she mimicked their signatures and calmly cashed the checks at nearby banks. In return, tenants were given only a few dollars in allowance, supposedly after rent, meals, and miscellaneous expenses had been deducted. Anyone who questioned her or demanded answers was silenced with threats of being sent back to institutions, followed by generous meals and feigned kindness to keep them compliant. The first death officially linked to Dorothea occurred in April 1982, the death of Ruth Monroe. Monroe was both a friend and business partner of Dorothea. Exhausted from caring for her ill husband, she moved into an upstairs room of Dorothea's house. Just days later, she was found dead. An autopsy revealed the cause of death to be an overdose of codeine and Tylenol. Dorothea tearfully told investigators that Ruth had been deeply depressed over her husband's terminal illness and had likely taken her own life. Trusting Dorothea's emotional testimony and the lack of immediate evidence, police ruled the death a suicide. For Dorothea Puente, this moment was pivotal. She had taken a life and escaped justice. It gave her the dangerous confidence that she could kill and remain untouched. Her boldness escalated rapidly. One of her most chilling performances involved Levon Jelmuth, an elderly man who trusted her so completely that he allowed her access to his Ford pickup truck and joint bank account. After months of correspondence while Jelmuth was incarcerated, he moved into her home only to vanish soon after. Dorothea sent his family letters claiming he had gone away for medical treatment or simply did not wish to be contacted. The deception lasted for years. Meanwhile, she collected his pension checks every single month, steadily filling her storage sheds. To Dorothea, tenants were not human beings. They were living ATM machines. Inside the boarding house, Dorothea ruled with a perfected double life. She served food and drinks laced with medication, leaving tenants weak, confused, and compliant. Drugged and disoriented, they had no idea where their money was going. They became puppets signing documents at her direction without understanding what they were authorizing. She carefully severed all outside contact. Phone calls were monitored. Visitors were turned away with excuses: they're sleeping, or they stepped out. When one tenant, Malcolm Mackenzie, reported to police that Dorothea had drugged him and stolen his belongings, she was briefly jailed. But after her release, she became even more calculated. From then on, she selected only those with few relatives or none at all. People no one would look for. These were the names added to her list of the dead. To maximize profit, Dorothea overcrowded the house, cramming multiple tenants into small rooms. Yet on the surface, the home appeared peaceful and well kept, with a manicured garden and cheerful decorations. She attended community gatherings, donated to local causes, and cultivated the image of a respected citizen. This mask worked flawlessly. Despite frequent visits from parole officers, not once did she fall under serious suspicion. While investigators sat in her living room sipping tea, elderly tenants upstairs and in the basement lay sedated, slowly approaching death. Dorothea was earning more than $5,000 a month, money soaked in the suffering and blood of her residents. By this stage, Her psychology had moved beyond greed. What consumed her now was sadistic control, the thrill of absolute power over another human being's survival. Even after killing her tenants, she continued to impersonate them, deceiving government agencies and savoring a warped sense of superiority. Her boarding house was a sealed chamber where those meant to be protected were systematically erased, and Dorothea Puente was its unquestioned ruler. What we see in Chapter 2 is one of the clearest records of how human desperation can be exploited to satisfy unchecked greed. The web Dorothea wove was no longer just financial fraud. It was tightening toward the silent bodies that would soon be buried beneath her backyard. The backyard of the boarding house at 1426 F Street in Sacramento was the final destination where Dorothea Puente's brutal crimes reached completion. At first glance, it looked like a small urban paradise. Dorothea was obsessively devoted to gardening, cultivating vibrant flowers and fresh vegetables throughout every season. Neighbors watched her carefully tending the soil and plants and saw nothing more than the image of a kind, hard-working elderly woman. But beneath that colorful garden lay layer upon layer of cold remains, those she had robbed and murdered. To Dorothea, the garden was not a hobby. It was a massive graveyard, a place designed to permanently bury her crimes and erase all evidence. Dorothea employed a disturbing and audacious method to conceal the bodies. She used the labor of others. She lured homeless men and alcoholics from the surrounding area to the boarding house under the pretense of offering them work. Among them was an elderly man known to neighbors only by the nickname Boss. Dorothea spoke openly about him, claiming she treated him like a son, and was even considering adopting him. She put Boss to work digging up the yard and repairing the basement floor. At her direction, he broke through concrete, dug deep pits, and hauled soil away in a wheelbarrow, spreading it throughout the yard. He never imagined that the holes he was digging would soon become someone's grave. Each time a body was buried, Dorothea took calculated steps to suppress the odor of decomposition. She scattered large amounts of lime and deodorizing chemicals throughout the yard. She also ordered Boss to pour thick new concrete over the floor of a small backyard shed. The noise and dust were explained away as routine home repairs, successfully deflecting suspicion from neighbors. When the soil level in the garden began to rise unnaturally, she concealed the change by planting even more flowers and shrubs. The more death accumulated beneath the ground, the greener and more beautiful the garden became, a chilling contradiction. Even after burying her victims, Dorothea never stopped performing the illusion that they were still alive. When tenants asked about those who suddenly disappeared, she fabricated detailed stories claiming they had gone to stay with relatives or had been transferred to better facilities. On occasion, she would even wear a victim's clothing and show only her back, or alter her voice to make it seem as though the tenant was still alive inside their room. Because of this meticulous deception, residents never realized that the person next door had already been buried beneath the yard. For Dorothea, murder was not a single act, it was a prolonged operation involving burial, concealment, and continuous performance. Perhaps the most shocking revelation was that Boss himself eventually vanished. Dorothea told neighbors he had left town for work. Investigators later discovered that he, too, had been murdered by Dorothea and buried beneath the very concrete floor he had helped prepare. Even her only accomplice was treated as a disposable tool eliminated once he became a liability. Anyone who witnessed her crimes or showed even the slightest suspicion was removed without hesitation. The yard of her boarding house became a massive swamp of silenced souls. When investigators finally excavated the garden, they found a scene of utter horror. On the surface, it was a beautiful yard, but removing just a few inches of soil revealed human bones and decaying clothing. There was no system or order to the burials. Bodies were crammed wherever space allowed. Some were wrapped in plastic, others were discovered fully clothed. This chaotic disposal made one thing clear: Dorothea did not view the dead as human beings, only as waste to be disposed of. Every morning, she walked over these graves, watered the flowers, and prepared breakfast for her tenants. The silent witnesses beneath the garden were the foundation upon which Dorothea built her false peace. She cashed checks issued in the names of the dead, using the money to buy elegant dresses and expensive jewelry, and then used the same blood-stained funds to purchase seeds and fertilizer for her garden. Death created wealth, and that wealth, in turn, helped conceal more death. This cycle repeated itself at 1426 F Street for years. The record of Chapter 3 exposes the sadistic calm that defined Dorothea Puente, and the extreme cruelty hidden beneath it. Her garden became more than a crime scene, it became a symbol of how horrifying the outcome can be when human greed disguises itself as beauty. On November 11, 1988, the quiet boarding house in Sacramento was suddenly flooded with investigators, and the fortress of lies Dorothea Puente had built over years finally began to collapse. The trigger was the disappearance of Alvaro Montoya, a tenant with intellectual disabilities. His devoted social worker, Judy Moyes, grew suspicious when Montoya vanished without explanation. Dorothea gave evasive and inconsistent answers, claiming he had gone to Mexico to visit family. Judy refused to accept those explanations and formally requested a police investigation. When detectives first arrived at the scene, they were briefly disarmed by Dorothea's gentle smile and grandmotherly appearance. But in one corner of the backyard, they noticed something deeply unsettling: an area of soil that was unnaturally soft. Moments after an investigator sank a shovel into the ground, the body of 78-year-old Leon Carpenter was uncovered. The scene instantly erupted into chaos. What stunned investigators most was Dorothea's bizarre calm amid the discovery of a corpse. Rather than panic, she tearfully protested that being suspected was deeply unfair. While officers scrambled to excavate the backyard for additional bodies, Dorothea quietly devised a daring escape. She politely asked the lead detective if she could go to a nearby hotel to have a cup of coffee and calm her nerves. At that moment, police still viewed her not as a prime murder suspect, but merely as a person of interest, and they made a fatal mistake by granting her request. Wearing a purple coat and carrying a pink umbrella, Dorothea walked out of the house with measured elegance. She never went for coffee. Instead, she fled toward Los Angeles. Even on the run, Dorothea could not abandon her true nature. In Los Angeles, hiding her identity, she approached a retired elderly man named Charles Wilgus at a bar. Introducing herself as a wealthy widow, she charmed him and played the role of a woman seeking companionship and a fresh start. But her freedom was short-lived. News of Dorothea's disappearance and the bodies being uncovered in the backyard at 1426 F Street was spreading nationwide. Wilgus froze when he saw a face on television identical to the woman he had just met. Terrified, he immediately contacted authorities. Dorothea Puente was arrested without resistance near a motel in Los Angeles. Even at the moment of her arrest, she insisted she had killed no one, claiming she had merely buried elderly tenants who had died of natural causes. The trial began in October 1992, after being transferred to Monterey County, California. The move was granted due to overwhelming public outrage in Sacramento, which the defense argued would prevent a fair trial. Prosecutor John O'Mara called more than 130 witnesses, reconstructing Dorothea's crimes in chilling detail. The prosecution argued that she incapacitated her victims with near-lethal doses of powerful sedatives such as Dalmane and codeine, then suffocated them. Critical evidence included the locations and methods of burial, as well as extensive documentation proving she had forged signatures to steal her victims' social security and pension checks. The courtroom was shaken daily by horrific testimony. The public struggled to reconcile the image of an ordinary-looking grandmother with the monstrous acts laid bare before them. The defense fought desperately to reduce her sentence by highlighting Dorothea's humanity. They emphasized her traumatic childhood, losing her parents young and allegedly suffering sexual abuse, and argued these experiences warped her psychological development. Her estranged biological daughter even took the stand, testifying about Dorothea's past caregiving in an attempt to evoke sympathy from the jury. Mental health experts suggested Dorothea may have been unable to fully distinguish reality from delusion under extreme stress. But these arguments collapsed under the weight of the evidence. 7 bodies unearthed from the backyard, and the remains of Levon Gilmuth discovered in a trunk near a river. The trial stretched on for nearly a year. Dorothea sat expressionless at the defense table, occasionally shaking her head as if wronged. She never once admitted to committing murder. Prosecutors sought the death penalty, arguing that a predator who preyed upon society's most vulnerable deserved no mercy. After days of intense deliberation, the jury returned verdicts of first-degree murder on 3 counts, while remaining charges ended in mistrials due to deadlock. Though not unanimous on every count, the 3 convictions alone sealed her fate. Dorothea Puente was sentenced to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. In delivering the sentence, the judge condemned her calculated deception and her profound violation of human dignity. As Dorothea was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, she was no longer the kindly boarding house owner. She was branded, once and for all, as one of America's most notorious serial killers who turned human lives into tools for her own greed, and was sent to a cold prison cell to spend the rest of her life. After the trial concluded, Dorothea Puente was permanently confined behind the cold walls of the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla. The sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole was society's command that she spend the rest of her days atoning for her crimes. Yet even behind bars, Dorothea continued to live inside a rigid world of her own, making one built entirely on denial and fiction. Throughout her incarceration, she never wavered from her claim that she was a kind, compassionate grandmother who had been falsely accused. She repeatedly told fellow inmates how she had once been a wonderful cook and how devoted she had been to helping people in need. In her mind, the victims buried beneath her backyard were not murder victims at all, but elderly tenants who had died of natural causes people she insisted she had simply laid to rest with care. Thus, within her distorted logic, a grotesque narrative was complete. Even in prison, Dorothea achieved a strange form of notoriety. She regularly responded to letters from admirers and crime researchers alike, and during that time, she even published a cookbook filled with her personal recipes. The idea that the owner of the House of Death had released a cookbook shocked the public, but Dorothea used it as yet another attempt to project her human side. In interviews, she continued to insist on her innocence, sometimes breaking down in tears as she claimed she had been the victim of a societal witch hunt. Her behavior starkly illustrated classic psychopathic traits: pathological lying and a complete lack of remorse. Rather than acknowledging the families she had destroyed, or the dignity she had stolen from her victims, Dorothea remained focused solely on her own comfort and public image. While Dorothea remained incarcerated, the outside world was forced to confront the systemic failures exposed by her crimes. The Puente case triggered widespread scrutiny and criticism of the social welfare system as a whole. In particular, the lack of oversight in elder care facilities and the ease with which social security checks could be misappropriated came under fire. That Dorothea had been able to steal benefits for years and bury bodies in her backyard without detection was the result of society's neglect of its most vulnerable members. In response, state governments and related agencies strengthened procedures for verifying whether benefit recipients were alive and mandated surprise inspections of boarding homes and similar welfare facilities. Ironically, Dorothea's personal evil became a tragic catalyst for reinforcing the social safety net. As time passed, Dorothea herself grew old and frail, yet her stubborn silence and lies never collapsed. She died in prison on March 27, 2011, at the age of 82. Without ever offering a single sincere apology. Her death marked the end of a serial killer's life, but the wounds and unanswered questions she left behind remain unresolved. After her death, the Sacramento boarding house where she had lived was sold to a new owner, but it is still remembered by many as a place of horror. Rather than dismissing it as merely a haunted house, the new owner chose to preserve it as a site of social reflection, occasionally opening it to the public for educational purposes. The Dorothea Puente case offers a profound insight into the banality of evil. She was not a horned monster, but a woman with the face of a sweet grandmother, someone you might pass on the street without a second glance. The fact that her kindness and warm smile were nothing more than bait for her victims serves as a chilling reminder of how dangerous blind trust can be. The case also urges us to pay attention to the marginalized neighbors who disappear quietly around us. Had it not been for one social worker who genuinely cared about Alvaro Montoya, countless more nameless souls might have remained buried beneath Dorothea's garden. In the final chapter of her story, her end may have been quiet and natural, but the dark truths about human nature revealed along the way will be recorded forever. Dorothea Puente tried to cover her life with flowers and manicured hedges, but in the end, the truth broke through the concrete and emerged into the light. Her story stands as a stark lesson in how far human greed can corrupt a person and what responsibility a community must bear to prevent such corruption. Dorothea has now faded into history, but the place known as the House of Death remains a mirror reflecting the shadows that still exist in our society. That concludes today's story. Please like and subscribe. Thank you for watching.